did is then they started to take me to these parties up in Columbus, and there would be 4 or 5 guys. Most of them were college age, and we would line up. And then the guests would come in and they'd walk down the line and they would look us over. I could remember them like checking us out, asking us questions, grabbing our muscles, touching our chests and stuff like that. Then they would go into a back room and then they would place a silent auction. And so I walked to the car, and as I walked to the car, I remember telling myself, well, if mom doesn't believe me, who's going to believe me? Is that children want to be heard and they want to be believed.
I fall upon my face in disgrace, and I'm running down a hall of pain. At least I'm out of the rain, pouring rain falls on me again and again. Oh, can I afford to cry? I paid the price for every lie, an eye for an eye. Oh, why? Oh, why?
Hello, I'm Craig Heiting, and welcome to a conversation with John Michael Lander, a survivor of male childhood sexual assault and CSA activist, sponsored by the Men of Voices Beyond Assault.
I'm Lorward Choi. As most of us here today, Craig and I are also survivors. Voices Beyond Assault hosts these monthly programs because we understand that men who suffer sexual assault are not always heard. We want to amplify their voices, empower them to heal, and provide the resources needed.
And now let me introduce our guest today, John Michael Lander. At 14, John Michael was an accomplished diver destined to rise to the world stage in the Olympics.
But soon after, the adults put in charge of his training began grooming him and trafficking him into a life of sexual abuse.
Thus began a secret life for John Michael, filled with shame and guilt, while still managing to win gold medals at the Norway and Danish Cups.
John Michael chronicled his story in 2 novels, Surface Tension and Cracked Surface, and he has worked tirelessly to raise awareness about sexual predators, the long-term effects of sexual abuse, and survival.
A certified trainer and life coach with the Self-Talk Institution, John Michael has been leading the way across the country with his writings, public speaking, workshops, and many interviews.
It's the story of John Michael's triumph, healing, and helping others we'll focus on today, and we are very honored to have you join us today. Thank you, John Michael.
Yeah, John Michael, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. I am humbled with that introduction. That's powerful. Thank you.
And we want to ask you a lot about your story, right? You have so much that you have been telling. So could you give us just a little bit of background on, your story a little bit, where you've been, anything you would like to add about the intro we gave you? We'd love to hear about.
Well, definitely. Again, that intro, I can't wait to hear that back again, and that makes me feel proud. I will say that, I started diving when I was 12, but by the time I was 14, I had qualified for the Junior Olympics, and I took 8th at the Junior Olympics, which was a big accomplishment for me because I was coming from a farm town in Ohio. And what happened is that there was an article in the newspaper ran, and a lawyer supposedly had saw it. And what he did is he contacted my mother, and so they started to meet privately for a couple of months. And during these meetings, he basically was telling my mother that he had a group of professionals that could help me achieve my dream of going to the Olympics and getting a college scholarship and all this incredible stuff, that they were willing to do this if she would allow this to happen. And why this was happening, we also learned later on in retrospect that this lawyer had already approached my team, and talked to the institution there and told them that they could bring in sponsorship money and would be willing to sponsor me if they would let this happen. And so they agreed to it. Then he went and he met with my mother and basically groomed her and got her to share her advice. Is sure, okay, that's fine. And then and only then did he approach me. So what I call this is the predatory grooming trifecta. And that's where the predator grooms the institution first, the parent second, and then the child, which allows this predator to go undetected for years. And that's exactly what happened. And so when he started to meet with me, he started to share with me that this was the only way that I was ever going to make it to the Olympics because my parents did not have the financial backing for me. But these professional people would be able to do this. And it was this whole grooming process. It took several months of just meeting with him at dinners and maybe go see a show or something like that. And it seemed very, very normal in a way. And he really played on the fact that this was the only way that I could go forward. And so I eventually said, okay. And he had me sign a contract with him. And basically, there were three things in the contract that I had to fulfill. And that was to dive as well as I could and win as many titles as I could, to be polite and courteous to the professionals so that they're not upset with me, and to do my best in school. Those are the only three things. And later on, I also found out that from my mother, he had also kind of did a scare tactic with her that if we went ahead and did this, my parents would be responsible for any money that the professionals donated to the family if anything fell apart. So basically, I would go see a professional. That professional, whatever profession he was in, would turn around and help my parents in certain ways. Doctor's appointments, eye exams, ear exams, anything like that. My sister had a terrible sledding accident, had to have reconstructive surgery in her chin. Everything was taken care of. No money from my parents. The professionals did this. And so that is the whole crux behind it. And that's what put me into this circle of professional men. And that's basically how it started.
So when did the actual abuse start in that process? I mean, and can you describe that a little bit without getting into too much detail?
Sure. What basically it started very slow and very subtle. The lawyer then introduced me to one of the other professionals, and it'd be like we'd have dinner, just the three of us. And then it would slowly introduce these other professionals. And then this was all happening when I was about 15. And so what had happened as they did is then they started to take me to these parties up in Columbus. And there would be 4 or 5 guys. Most of them were college age. And we would line up. And then the guests would come in and they'd walk down the line and they would look us over. And while they were looking us over, we were in costumes, basically, that the host wanted us to wear. And they always put me in a white Speedo. I never understood why, but I just thought because I was the diver. And I was the youngest. I was still in high school. The other guys were in college. And they would go down, and I could remember them like checking us out, asking us questions, grabbing our muscles, touching our chests, and stuff like that. Then they would go into a back room, and then they would place a silent auction, a silent bid on which boy that they wanted. And then the highest bid got whatever boy that they chose. And then there was this other incentive where the boy who had the highest money brought in got special gifts as well. So there was like this competition between the boys and the competition between the guests. And this is how this worked. And then, the guests would take the boy, they would go out on the town. Sometimes they would spend the weekend with them, and then they would rotate us. And so anybody had a chance to get the same person.
That's terrific.
Yeah. There's just so many layers to this story of just how you are being commodified and objectified and just made into like this plaything instead of the human that you are. During this process, are your parents aware of what is going on? Were you able to tell your parents?
Right. And that's another crux of the story that's kind of confusing to me to this day. I believe my mother knew because she already met with a lawyer, and she was the one who had to have me at the right place at the right time, dressed the correct way, and to go. She had to have me prepared and ready. And then they would come and pick me up from the farm, or they would meet at a certain place. And she was the one that always took care of that. The question was, did my father know? And there were times I wondered about if he did know, but he sat there and he would watch these cars come and pick me up. And there were little things that he would say along the way, sort of like, he'd throw Bible verses out that if you lay with a man, you're an abomination, and you are an abomination. He would always tell me that since I had done this, that I would take a wife or a woman with me to hell. And did I really want to do that? but it was never talking to me about what was actually happening. No one spoke to me. There was one time I did tell my mother, and I remember it was on my 16th birthday. Car came to pick me up, and I told my mother I didn't want to go. And she was like, "What do you mean? You have to go. He's here." And I said, "I don't want to go." And it finally got to the point that I blurted out that he touches me. And she looked at me and I thought, oh my God, this is it. She's finally going to get it and they're going to do something and they're going to help me. Her face changed. And then she slapped me across the face and she said, "It is not nice to make up lies about people. If anything ever happened, it must have been your fault. This person is a pillar of the community. Everyone knows who he is and likes him. So you go and have dinner with him and come back and tell me all the things that you had for dinner." And that was it. And so I walked to the car. And as I walked to the car, I remember telling myself, well, if mom doesn't believe me, who's going to believe me? And that was reinforced throughout the grooming process because the lawyer would remind me that we're only doing this for you because we see that you're the only one on the team that can go to the Olympics. And you don't want to tell anybody about this because nobody will believe you. And that's how this whole thing started to grow.
I want to go back to the auctioning process because I just think
Sure.
that's just amazing. How, I mean, do you think, did your father drive you to the auctioning process? Did you ever tell them about this process and how many boys were involved? And did you ever talk to the other boys or anything? It's just amazing to me that this even goes on.
I would be picked up from the farmhouse by the lawyer and taken to the party, which was usually like an hour away from our house. So my father never dropped me off anywhere like that. There were usually about 4 or 5 boys at the parties, and they were usually college kids because this group, we were called. It was called the Miller. Oh, I shouldn't say that, but who cares? The Miller Farm is what they called it, and we were the ponies. And if you were an older boy, there was a couple of grad students there. They were the colts. So that's how they determined who we were. And I was the youngest, so I was the pony, of course. And I did become really good friends with an older guy who was a college student, and he kind of protected me throughout the process. And he would like pull me aside and say, just do this and don't say that, don't do this, just follow my lead. And that's basically how I got through and dealt with everything. No one talked about it. We never said exactly what was going on. It seemed like everyone knew, and it was just this normal thing that we do every weekend.
Did you feel physically threatened, or was there like a air of fear in you if you didn't comply? I mean, that you'd
Oh
be
yeah,
hurt.
always there was always the fear. You never knew what was going to happen in one of the events. You never knew what the professional would do. I think a lot of times I was more threatened to the fact that I had signed this contract and that if anything went wrong, my parents would be accountable for it and they would have to pay everything back. And there was a threat that they would take them to court and throw them in jail, and all the kids would have to go into foster care. So there was this back fear of it. And then there was a fear that if I did not do well, then I would be dropped. And then I would have to be responsible of paying what I had to pay back. So it was a constant, this like slow, steady stream of fear throughout. And as the years went by, because this happened all 4 years of my high school, and as the years went by, I started to find ways to try to regain my control within this group of professionals. One of the ways is if I could like come on to them, if that makes sense. I would get in the car and I'd say, God, you're really, really attractive. And man, you're somebody I could see myself with for the rest of my life. And I would turn it. And what was really weird about this is that most of these men had children my age, boys my age. And this kind of freaked them out. So one or two things would happen. Either the event would be over with and I'd have to find my way home, or, and of course, they never told the other guys because then that looked bad in their group. So it's kind of like the locker room talk. If you had a date with a young kid, you exploited it and you talked about it. And the other one is it would become violent. And if it became violent, I knew that the situation would end quicker than if it was not violent. So I would just like basically take a deep breath and go with it. I found myself starting to count things, and I still do this today. I would count the tiles. I would count how many times I saw the lights flash by if we were in a hotel. So it helped me help remove myself from the situation. And the other thing that I learned really quickly is if I did not climax before they did, then the situation would be over quick too, because they weren't interested in me. They were only interested in taking care of what they needed. And then I also told myself that this was not sex then, if I didn't climax. And then I was okay. And that's how I was able to start to create scenarios and logic in my head to get through everything all the time. Also felt like I left my body a lot. I had times when it would start to happen, especially if it got violent, that I would like find myself in the corner of the room looking down and just watching. And that was kind of an odd feeling, but it also removed me and I didn't feel anything when I did that.
That your body is attempting to dissociate in order to
Yeah.
survive these terrible experiences. And I'm seeing just the way that you're talking, you had to take a lot of agency and just find ways to cope with your situations where it was like, if I do this, it might be violent, but it might end sooner, which is a really dark and like terrible way to try and conceptualize the world, especially, as a high schooler who is like at this very like pivotal moment in their life. Um, you had mentioned that this was going on all 4 years of your high school, and as you're continuing on, how does this come to a conclusion? Like, how do you get out of this situation? How does this abuse stop for you? Like, where's that?
So that's really an interesting question, and I have to tell you, I started to plan my exit that I thought I'll call it plan my exit, is that when I started to apply for universities, I was looking for the furthest place I could go. And there were three that I was really interested in: Stanford, of course, then there was University of California, Irvine, and then there was the University of Hawaii. And I thought that if I could go to these schools, I would get away from all the professionals because they wanted me to go to Ohio State University where everything was kind of kept. And I did. I applied. I was turned down at Stanford, which crushed me. But I got into the Irvine and into the University of Hawaii. But I knew that I couldn't really afford Hawaii, so I went to Irvine, and I got an academic and an athletic scholarship. So I thought that I was all taken care of. But what I didn't know is that my mother had been telling them where I was going, and they were still paying for so many things. They paid for my housing. They paid, so they were still had me in their wraps, which I didn't know. And then while I was at the university, I had not had any help. I did not get any professional help to deal with what had happened through my high school years. So I kind of repeated certain things, behaviors, and a grad student started following me, and I somehow upset this grad student by ignoring him. And the next thing I know, I woke up in the wooded area of school, and I had to go to the medical center because he got to me. He found me and basically raped me. And here's where I ended up going. And I got really, really sick because I couldn't comprehend in my head that I went through 4 years of this with these professionals and being passed all around. And this was just one person, and it broke me. And so I got really sick again. And the next thing I know, I have a flight going back to Ohio. What had happened is that the medical team had called my parents, told them, my mother called the lawyer called the hospital where I was at. They got all the information. And the next thing I know, he flew me back home, put me right back in the center of it. So I was back in that whole cycle again. And then what happened is I went to a school in the area where I was living, and there was a dance teacher there. And she pulled me aside and said, meet me in the office. I went in, and she had just, started teaching there. And she was a New York dancer, Broadway and all this stuff. And she looked at me and she says, I know something's wrong. Tell me, I could see it in your eyes. And she worked with me. And I finally was able to trust her and get the story out to her. She was the one that started the whole ball of getting me away from these people. When I was in LA going to school at Irvine, I was cast on General Hospital, the soap opera. And so what she did is she called the casting directors and said, hey, could you take this kid back? Can you give him extra work so he has income? Then she helped with them, with the casting director, they found a place for me to live. And then they silently actually got me on a plane, and my mother didn't know where I was. No one knew where I went. And that's how it all started to unravel. And I got away from it.
Wow, so your mom didn't know where you were. She must have been distraught at that. But you were just trying to get away from all of this ring of people that were doing these horrific things. In this was all in Ohio that these people were doing this, because people think of this as only going on in some place like California, Hollywood, or
Right.
something. This was actually in Middle America, Ohio. So so did they ever, so how did you go about telling your mom where you were, and prevent these guys from finding you again?
Well, I think what happened really, and I don't know the answers to all this, so I did eventually reach out to her on a phone call, and she said, "Don't let anyone know where you are. They're looking for you." And so that was the first time I heard her say that there was this thing happening. And I think it was also her epiphany that she realized that she was a part of something that she didn't want to acknowledge. And I think this was her way to also try to protect me. And so she literally told them she had no idea where I was, although she did speak to me and that I was okay. And that's all they knew. And so that's how that whole thing kind of unraveled. And again, it's kind of ironic that I run from Ohio, where I'm being trafficked, to LA into the Hollywood scene.
But weren't you
So from
afraid that
one
they were
fire
going
to
to?
another.
I'm sorry, weren't you afraid they're going to see you on General Hospital and
Oh, they
kind of
did.
figure it out? Oh, they
Well,
did.
they did, and they finally did, yes. And but they never at that point, I think they realized that I was gone. And they let me go. It wasn't until years later that I had run into some other boys who were a part of this cycle. And I just, that's when a lot of the guilt came into me, because I felt like I should have said something. I should have gone to somebody because I could have helped these other people. And I did not. And I still feel guilty about that.
I think, Michael, you touched on something that I think resonated with me deeply. You said this is going on through high school. You thought you had gotten out of the situation, and it kind of plays itself again. And I can only imagine how difficult of an emotion that is to deal with. You think you had gotten to a different place, and it happens again, and you're back in now, basically back in your own state. Can you kind of walk me through a little bit about what you were feeling, and how did you like come to terms with those feelings at all, if you did at all?
I think I'm still dealing with coming to terms to what it feels, because it shows up a lot.
Hmm.
It'll show up while I'm working. It'll show up with relationship. It shows up everywhere. I think the way that I started to realize that something was really, really wrong, that this was not normal, because you got to understand, this was all normalized for me.
Hmm.
This was my way of going to the Olympics. And that's what I thought. I thought I was just paying a price, a small price to be the elite athlete that I was. And again, I did travel the world. I won gold medals. Everything. It was like, it was working. The system was working. And I think that what happened is that I had convinced myself so well through high school that that's what protected me. So I created this false self of who I was and everything. And these were just things that I had to deal with. When I thought that I was free from them, when I was in California going to the university there, when the incident happened with the grad student, then I took that on as that this is my fault. If this happened before, I'm creating it and I'm recreating it again. And that, I think, was the thing that was so devastating. And what happened after that is that I started to spiral, thinking that I wasn't good enough. All I was good for was a toy. I was never going to amount to anything. No one was really talking to me about if I was smart or not, even though I had a 4.0 in high school. And when I went to the university, I was on scholarships. I saw all that, but it never really registered that that meant that I could be smart. And I started second guessing everything, and that I was never going to make it unless I had someone else to help me. There's a whole big thing today, even when money is transpired between me for the job I've done. Is it good enough? And I went through a lot of period when I was doing like General Hospital and all my children. I would take that money and I would get rid of it as quickly as I could, because if I didn't have it, then it wasn't mine. And it just this constant reiteration of what happened. And in Cracked Surface, the second book, you start seeing what happened when I went back to LA. And then I have another book coming out. It's called Broken Surface, which is all about my experiences for how I put myself back into abusive situations, why trying to become an actor in LA. And it's just this constant reiteration. And so basically, what I kept telling myself, I was not good enough. I'm not worthy enough. This is all I'm ever going to be good for. I should just be lucky. I should count my stars. I should be grateful for all this. And those are things that I still hold on to today.
Yeah, it's interesting. All of these things that you're talking about, all these emotions, these feelings, the guilt, the shame, the not feeling good enough, I think they are common among all of us, is particularly male survivors. And I think that it's horrific that this happens with males and females, but it's a little different with males, isn't it? It's a little there's a little bit of different situations about us being able to deal with these things when they're happening to us. Can you go into that a little bit? How it was different or more difficult in some ways by being a man?
Well, I can do the best that I can because I've never been a woman. So I just kind of deflect on that just to take a break there. Yeah, it is true. And I think it goes back to as a teenager, I think one of the other things that I really freaked out about was that my body responded when I didn't want it to. I would be in these situations and my body was responding because of the touching and whatever was going on. And I didn't know how to stop it. The fear. Dr. Hopper, I'm sorry, said that fear can cause, erections. Things like this is just normal. But in me, I thought this was what I was supposed to be. And so I struggled a lot with my sexual orientation. So that in itself created a lot of questioning. But our society is also so, there's the right way and the wrong way to be a real man. A real man would fight back. A real man would not be raped. A real man, all these stipulations and beliefs that we're surrounded with as children. Real men don't have emotions. We all these laws that we have, and you can't talk about it. And if you did talk about it, you were a wuss, or you were a pansy, or you were weak. And so I really struggled with all of that, especially after trying to tell my mother and having her turn me down and basically say, "You're lying to me." It's really was detrimental to my mind state. I do remember that I tried to find ways to indicate so that someone would ask me, because I signed this contract. I wasn't allowed to talk to anybody. I could not go to say you, Craig, if you were my teacher, I could not go to you and say, this is happening to me. But if I did an indicator that you would come and say, all right, John Michael, what's going on? I had to respect the teacher and tell. Then I was safe. Then I could get that out there. So I started doing things. I was one of these kids who always had to be impeccably dressed. If I got dirt on my shirt or anywhere, I had to go home and change. I just couldn't be dirty. And so I decided that I'd wear the same outfit for the whole week. And I thought, this is going to get someone's attention. Someone's going to ask me what's wrong. No one did. And then the other thing that I thought I'd do is I'm not going to shower. And I was a kid that would take 2 or 3 showers a day because I could not stand the chlorine on me from practices. And I can remember my mom overhearing my mom telling someone, "Oh, don't worry about it. It must be his teenage rebellion years. He's in the pool all the time, so he's got to be clean. So let's not worry about it." Felt like that failed. And then the final thing that I really tried was I would try to drop the F bomb as loud as I could. And I was one of those kids that if I cussed, everybody laughed because it just didn't fit my personality. And I would scream it out in the middle of the hallways at school or in class. And not one teacher asked me out, asked me to come up to speak to them or talk to me after class. So I felt like all these indicators were failing. And I felt like there was no one to talk to. So all of this, toxic masculinity, this anxiety of being a male, and all this stuff was just wrapped around everything. And so I basically became a prisoner within myself.
I think I can very much relate to, so much of what you're talking about. This like constant self-doubt that you find yourself facing, where you're just like, I'm not good enough, even though people will be like, what are you talking about? You are literally amazing at everything that you do because you push yourself. And you're like, I push myself because I'm scared and because I don't want to fail and I don't want people to see me as a failure. But yet somehow at the same time, we also hold this belief of, I want someone to notice. And you're almost like sending out these feelers of, hey, who's noticing what I'm putting out right now? And
Right.
who's going to pay attention to what is going on? Because I think for many of us survivors, one of the things we struggle with is, does someone care if I tell them? Especially as males, we really, I find myself doubting that all the time of, is someone going to care even if I speak up? And having just
Right.
that tiny, tiny morsel of someone saying, hey, is everything okay? Goes, I think, such a long way, especially for male survivors. And so I just want to thank you for sharing all of that. I think a lot of us can really relate to all of those feelings and just being able to see, oh, like the ways in which I act out of my pain are not abnormal. They are the normal response to have. Me acting out of my pain, whatever way that comes out, that is a valid response to have in order to try and seek help. So you're noticing yourself trying to get all these things to happen. You're trying to get people to notice, but at this point, you're still relatively silent about your abuse and what
Mhm.
is happening. And so I'm sure this is a very big moment in your story where you're saying, I'm turning the corner, I'm breaking my silence, and I'm going to talk about what happened to me. And just kind of walk us through that.
Sure. Yes. Well, it took a very long time. I will tell you that. I had, my acting career. I had all this other stuff, and then I went back to school and got my education degree, and I became a teacher at a high school. And it was during one of my, my second year I was teaching. I taught sophomores, and a young sophomore boy came into my classroom, and he shared with me that he was gay and that he had a boyfriend. And I was trying to figure out, why are you telling me this? Because I really don't care, because I have no data. I don't know what's going on. So unless you tell me, I won't know. And he basically told me that his boyfriend was older, and I asked him how much older, and he said he was 35. And all of a sudden, the first red flag came flying up in my face. And I went, "Oh, and is your mom all right with this?" And he said, "Oh yeah, mom and my grandma are cool with it because he pays for the groceries and the bills." And I tell you, I couldn't breathe. I think everything just left. And I told him that I was going to have to report it because we have to do that. And I went to the assistant principal and I told her, and she says, "Oh yeah, we know about this, and there's nothing we could do because the mother and the grandmother are supported." And then she looked at me and she said, "And by the way, he has a history of this." And I remember asking her, I said, "So you're not going to do anything?" And she goes, "We can't do anything. It's out of our hands." And I said, "But are you going to report this?" She says, "Fine, I'll make a report that you said this." And I said, "Okay." And then I realized that I didn't want to be there anymore. And so I decided that I was going to resign. But in the meantime, all of a sudden, I felt like the Pandora's box had opened. I realized that I was talking to myself, basically. That's the age I was when this was happening. And so everything started to fly up. Everything started to happen. And I spiraled really quickly. I got really depressed. And I got to the point that I felt like there was no way out. And I wrote a letter to my partner of 18 years at the time, and I said goodbye to our two Boston Terriers. And I went into the garage and I started to calm. And of course, as I was sitting there, you start having all these thoughts, and all of a sudden, I had this urge to get out of the car, turn the car off, and get back in the house. And I did. And when I got in the house, I fell on the floor and I cried. One of those really, really ugly, snotty cries. And I was exhausted. And I finally said to myself, I'm going to break my silence. I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I'm going to share that this has happened to me. And so then I realized that I would do a TED Talk. And I broke my silence on stage in front of thousands of people. And then I wrote the two books, and they all came out about the same time. And that was my first experience of sharing what had happened. I realized that I was having an uphill battle because of the white male privilege aspect that I carried, that this never happens to these type of people. And I felt people would not believe me. And what really was interesting was that after the TED Talk, the people who I thought were closest to me, the friends, the people I hung out with, all alienated me. and I felt like I was standing there alone. And yet there was this whole new group of people that were coming in and surrounding me and supporting me and cheerleading me. And at the point, I didn't see how valuable those people were. I just saw that the others had left. But I think that's one of the things as a survivor I was constantly dealing with, because being passed around, you're passed to one person, and then you think, oh, okay, if this is going to happen, I hope I can stay with this one person. No, they get tired of you and they're passing you on to somebody else so they can try something else. And that is just like this whole feeling of not ever being good enough. And I felt like my friends reiterated that to me, and it was scary. And I will say that this group of professionals were very tight and they protected each other. After I got into the circle, I guess you would say, there was one major doctor that I had to see all the time, and he was from Ohio State University. And I would have to be taken to Ohio State, even if I had an ear infection, whatever it was, and he took care of me. But when were in the office, that's when he would abuse me. And they would leave me with him for weeks on our weekends. And so he was the most consistent of all the people that I was trafficked with. And now there's this whole lawsuit with Ohio State and this doctor because he was the only doctor for 14 varsity sports at Ohio State University. And my case has been denied 3 times because I was not a student of Ohio State University during this time. I was a high school student. And Ohio State is ignoring the fact that teenagers were brought onto campus and abused, because that would open up a whole new can of worms. So I guess, does that help explain a little bit what was
Yeah.
happening there?
How many years after, because the average age for males to come forward is about 25 years. Was it how many years after the abuse is when you broke your silence? And
Maybe 25 years, yeah.
is it 25
I
years?
was told that my statute of limitation was gone. And yet just recently they have turned that over so that they can look into more situations. So that was a victory in a way. But yeah, it was way past the time.
And your abuse took place. It wasn't just these professionals. It was your coach. It was this. Have you ever named them, or what's happened to them since this? They should all be in jail. What
Yes.
what is the recourse for this? Is there any recourse, and are they still around there, and are they still doing this?
Well, I don't know about all that. I do know many of them have passed away. The doctor at Ohio State has. The coach, we've been looking for him. We have not heard anything about him. He was approached by the lawyer and was brought into the situation, and was paid extra money to pay more attention to me on top of the salary that he was getting to coach. Um, and he really befriended me, and he really made me feel like he was my sole survivor, savior type of thing. He told me that he understood, and he really played that side of me, and um, I believed him. And he allowed this relationship kind of thing to happen. And he said he never felt this way with a guy, and that nobody can ever find out, because nobody would believe us, and if anybody did find out, nobody would ever want to coach you again, because this is just bad. So don't tell anybody. So he, so I, it's so weird is that I think back about it. He became. I thought we were in a relationship, and he would take me overnights to Ohio State, and I'd spend the time with him, or we'd go to meets together, and I'd be in the hotel with him. And so I never thought of anything more about that. And I never put charges against that, because at that point I thought that I allowed it to happen. Even though there was a power struggle there, he was the coach, he was older than I was. I still felt that I was responsible for what happened. And we haven't found him since.
Yeah, that's a difficult place to be. And I think, again, like a lot of survivors can relate to the feeling where you feel responsible for what has happened to you. And you feel like everything is my fault. There's no amount of accountability for any outside forces, from malicious acts, from other people, from people who are just willing to be abusers and forego their moral compass. And that is a difficult feeling to sit with, especially when it is something so terrible. And I think wanted to reiterate, like, it's a very real feeling. And I think many of us share that. You're talking about this where you're breaking your silence. All these things are happening. your lawyers and your coaches, and how are you transitioning on from this part of your life? You know, you're growing a little bit older.
Mhm.
What's going on there?
Well, and I think both of you probably are aware of this too, that the healing journey is a lifetime experience. I don't
Yes, it
know if I
is.
will ever be completely healed. And I always question those who tell me that they're healed, they're done. Because I don't think that's ever going to happen for me, because there are certain little things that trigger me every day. And I'm learning how to react and respond to these triggers instead of letting them dictate to me what's happening. I think the older I get also, I start to put more distance between me and what really happened. And I can take moments to objectively look back. I think when I had the opportunity to speak about the hockey player Beach and his situation, and I was able to really get to look at what happened to his life. And I also think that when I became a board member with the Army of Survivors, which was started by three women who were abused by Nasser, and being able to sit and talk with them and understand what their experience was and comparing that to mine and seeing the similarities and also seeing the differences really has started to open up my mind. I think journaling has helped a lot. And I say the first thing that really, besides speaking out with the TED Talk and that, the other thing that really changed my life was when I was introduced to the Self Talk Institute. I've always had issues with therapy because some therapists were part of this professional group that I went to. And so every time I'd go into a office, there were triggers going on. And I realized I didn't want to be there. So I would try as hard as I could to figure out what they wanted, and I would answer what they needed and what they wanted so I could get out of there. And so they never really went beyond anything further. And when I went to the Self Talk Institute, I found that I could take where I am right now. I didn't have to go back and relive the abuse, but where's my mind right now? What are the negative self talks that I'm saying right now? And start to identify those and then start to work on changing the thought pattern there and creating positive neuron pathways in my brain, which would allow me to go forward in my life from this point. Then, when I'm ready, I could go back and start looking about what happened back there. And I think that's one of the reasons I was so moved, because I saw such quick changes within me that I decided to become a certified coach and trainer. And I want to help other survivors to understand that the self that they created during the abuse is not their true self. This was the tools and the method that they used to get through and survive that, and that they no longer need that now. And to slowly start on, like an onion, peeling those layers back to find the truth of who you are, and that you could still have the life you want if you allow yourself to do this. And to escape, I don't want to say escape, that's not the right word, but to acknowledge that we might be stuck in victimhoodism. Is that a word? Victimhoodism? But being a victim, because that's where I felt safe. And I know that sounds crazy, but that's what I knew. That's what was normal for me. And I would actually repeat myself and put myself back into that position of being that victim because I knew how to deal with it. And to learn that that was just a coping mechanism. And my real true self was wanting to be the person who makes my own decisions and have my own power back. And that's what helped me start to see. And so that I thought, okay, I can help others now.
Yeah. I wanted, and that's, there's a lot of good in joining together and helping others, and this is why Lorward and I do this program. And I know you've been a participant in our almost every single one, I think, if not every single one. So there's a lot of good in getting together as men, and that's why we formed the Men of Voices Beyond Assault in the first place. I want to talk about the Army of Survivors, because Nasser was the doctor who molested you and these women, and right, is that correct? So
No, I was not a
oh
Nasser survivor.
okay, all
I'm a
right,
Strauss survivor.
all right. So um Because I was saying what have you learned though through your work? Because you've done a lot of great work. You've done studies and you've a lot of writings and uh, what have you learned about predators and how they operate and what makes them do what they do?
Well, I think that's the million-dollar question, why they do what they do. And I'm not sure that we will ever come up with the exact answer to that because I think it's so individual for each one of them who become predators. There are studies that show that a lot of predators were sexually abused as children themselves. And one of the reasons that they target a certain age group is that's the age that they were abused. And so that's where they can relate to. And there's a lot of theories and a lot of ideas like that. I think that one of the things that I feel confident about is the grooming process and how it worked for me and how slow it was and how it became normalized and how everything was justified before it ever got into the next level. And when we went to the next level, it was just the natural next step. And that's how it was presented. And that's how I was able to comprehend it. And today we look at it and it's different because a lot of the grooming is happening on the internet. And I call it the predatory internet grooming, which I also call PIG, PIG. And these predators, there's like over 500,000 trying to reach out to connect with children daily through games, social medias, chat rooms. And they can use AI and this grooming method to develop a persona that is a lie. So a lot of young people are thinking that they're talking to somebody their same age. And the FBI came out with a warning that young men are the prime, targets because it's easier to manipulate them and to blackmail them, and there's a less chance that they'll report. Or young girls, when they find out that the predator is not who they say, find a voice thanks to the Me Too movement and the Nasser thing and all this stuff. They're finding their voice to be able to say, "Hey, this is happening to me online." Males still are not doing that, and we're learning that a lot of the males who have committed suicide were being groomed online. And this whole grooming process gets the young person to send pictures. And it starts out as a simple like headshot, and then they start to become explicit. And then what these predators do will take these pictures and post them on other porn hubs. So these images are out there. And then they come back and they tell, again, I'm generalizing all this. Then they're coming back to the child and saying, "Hey, did you see your picture over here?" And the kid will go look, and there he is or she is on this porn hub. And then they'll say, "I want more pictures." And if the kids resist, then they start threatening it. And they start telling them that they're going to go to their parents. Then they're going to let everybody know that they're on this porn site, blah, 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 whatever they can do, even to the point that they threaten to kill their pet. Because by this time, the kid has already told them where they live, what school they go to. They have built a relationship. And the child is exposed. And there's so much going on now. And we've seen a lot with certain social media sites that are still defending some of these people who are putting the CSAMs out there, which is child sexual abuse material, and are giving them rights back to where they want to be. And again, and then you look at another one. I don't know if I can say their names, but there's another online social platform media that has been brought up on charges that these predators are now hiring children to pass the child abuse material on to other people. And they figure that they cannot convict the child. So they're like little mules. And they're sending these things out and they're getting paid. These predators are paying these children to do this. But it looks like it's coming from the child to another child. It's mind warped. So that's kind of the things that I'm working on now and focusing on. And to speak out and to support the Army of Survivors, because a lot of these young women were abused with their parents in the office room with them. Nasser would have his back to them while he's manipulating and abusing the daughter or the girl, the gymnast, and telling the parents what medical process he is using. So when they would go out and the girl would say something to the parents, the parent would say, "Oh, no, no, that's just the medical thing that he had to do. He had to do that to help you." And and it's my dying wish is to get parents to realize that this is not true. If your child says something, please check it out, because only 15% of parents know what the children are doing online. And a lot of people, a lot of parents in America are saying, "Oh, my child's up in his room or her room and safe. They're okay." They're not safe. They're online talking to these predators.
Yeah, just recently I read a story of a boy in high school who was a part of the football team, and
Yes.
was exactly the same thing as you described happened to him, and he ended up taking his life as a result of being blackmailed over the pictures that he had given, thinking he was giving them to a girl his age.
Right. And Craig, it's really crazy. I did a study and I shared that story and his image, because if you go and look at who he is, blonde hair, blue-eyed football player, all American kid. And I also put up a picture of a young girl who was of a mixed background. And do you want to know, everyone went to the boy and wanted to know more about the boy than the girl, which
Mhm.
blew my mind. I had never seen something like that. And I only assumed that they wanted to know that because they both committed suicide. They're no longer with us. But they went to the boy. And I had never figured out the reasoning behind that.
Maybe, do you think it was because they were
Identified with him?
identifying with him, or was it a morbid curiosity because they didn't think that it happened to boys? Or I don't know. I mean, I've
I
heard this
think you're
from other
right.
people too. I've heard this from other people we've interviewed on this program, where they say there's sometimes people are just so interested or just curious about this. And yeah.
Well, it's also the whole thing with stats. You read one place it's one in six males, another place it's one in four males, another place it's one in 24, one in 13. And it's just interesting that we can always have another discussion about that, is how with even within the survivor group, these numbers are changing constantly. And I work with a lot of women survivors, and there is a resistance of having those numbers get too close to each other. Even the female survivors want to keep the male survivors out at some far distance so the story does not get messed up with their story. And I think once people start realizing and looking at this and looking into sports, because sports is where a lot of this is happening, and the numbers are really skewed, that we would, if we were able to talk to all the athletes, we would find that the numbers between the abuse between men and women are closer than they ever expected. And there may be even more abuse for males because it's just the breeding ground for it. The locker room talks, the team sports, all this stuff. What happens in the locker room stays there. And that's the belief that they have.
No, I think anytime anyone dives into a particular field or area and you uncover a lot of the facade that is up there, you start to realize, hey, there's a lot of darkness that is lying underneath the surface that is disguised as just the way things are done or just the team culture. And I think you do a good job of bringing to light, like, hey, like equipping and teaching your children and individuals of, hey, you need to be able to set boundaries for yourself. And also we want to be very aware and try to protect you as well. I think are two sides of a coin that we're constantly trying to equip children and keep kids safe is quite the challenge. And kind of leading off of that, I guess, there's obviously the parent side where I want to keep my child safe. I want to listen to them when they bring something up to me. I want to be able to be attentive to my children. And I guess I'm wondering, like, do you have a message for kids who are maybe in like situations where they feel a little stuck and like, hey, can I give you some equipping or some tools to be like, this is what you can do for yourself?
Right, right. There's two sides of that I like to address, if it's okay. And
Mhm.
I think with the child situation, if you feel like something's wrong and it's doesn't fit with you or it goes against what you feel inside, although you think it's normalized, ask about it,
Mhm.
talk to someone. Sometimes it could be with other athletes. And I know this is a problem because if I bring up Ohio State University, I remember being at the diving practice, and I got to dive at the, practice with the university team, and I would hear them talk about the doctor. And his nickname was Dr. Dick, Dr. Thumbs, Dr. whatever, Dr. Feelgood, and they would joke about it. And what was sad about that to me now, or reflect back at it, is that these were young men trying to comprehend and understand what was going on. And I remember I talked to my coach about it, and he says, "Oh, don't worry about it. That happens to everybody. It's just part of it, and you have to go through it. It's just part of being on the team. It doesn't mean anything," and blah, 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 blah. So again, even from the authorities down, they were normalizing this doctor's actions. But I knew inside of myself that it didn't feel right, but I didn't know how to express that out to people. Again, that's why I did indicators. That's why I tried to communicate ways that I could get someone to talk to me. And I really truly believe that children want someone to know. No matter how hard it is or how difficult it is, they want to know, and they want someone else to know. They want to talk about it. They just don't know how, because I don't think our brains are fully developed, especially for males, until mid to late 20s. So how do we wrap our head around this? How do we put in words what's going on? We don't know. And so there's that whole thing that we want to know, and we want someone else to know so that we can understand it. And I think there is the other side. And my mother, I remember talking with my mother once, and she finally told me that she had a feeling that something was happening, but she didn't want to know, that she chose to ignore it. But there was this instinct, and her message to other parents is, listen to your instinct. It's telling you this for a reason. And she feels guilty that she didn't follow through, because she feels that their mothers have a sixth sense about these things, and that they know intuitively that something's not right. And I think that if we can keep communications between parents and children open, there's going to be tough times, because teenagers are going to go through that whole mom and dad's please. But the point is if you have that communication that started from a young age, they're going to likely tell you more than if you don't have them. And I think, as much as our society and our movies like to act like, teenagers don't want their parents to know anything, and I think that's also just built on this myth. I think children really want you to know, because they don't know what to do with it. They don't have any idea. And I think communication is the number one. And the other thing is, I have this theory that when something is happening, even if they are being groomed online, the light in their eyes seem to darken. And I think parents, if they're attuned with their child and watching them in a part of their lives, they're going to see that light or that dimness has come in. Ask about it. Also, watch the body language. Be present enough to see they're trying to tell you something. They're trying to indicate something to you, because this is too big for them. And that's why, if they feel that there's no other way out, that's why a lot of times they think that they have to take their life. As we've seen with the football players, we've seen so many times, they don't know how to handle it. They need the help.
Yeah, I think that everything you say about trying to tell your parents and just trying to get noticed, and you don't really necessarily want to say it, you want them to notice. I used to be downstairs just rocking in a rocking chair for hours at a time by myself, just wanting someone to say something. And even when I at 12 years old tried to hang myself, I just wanted to get attention. I didn't want to kill myself. I wanted attention, and it just didn't happen. You talked about going to which I thought was interesting. You're going to Hollywood for safety, and when people think of Hollywood, they don't really think of that as a safe place for young boys either. With Corey Feldman, Corey Haim, James Safechuck, Wade Robson, who we've had on this show,
Yes.
all of these guys, and their mothers were groomed as well. All of these people did not find that safety in Hollywood. I'm glad you found it then, but did you see a prevalence of this kind of sexual abuse, predator behavior in Hollywood?
Oh, yeah, totally. I was walking back into the lion's den, which is where I felt comfortable. And I think the thing that attracted me to Hollywood was the fact that when I was acting, I could be those other parts of me that I wasn't able to express as myself. You know, um, it was funny because I would get compared sometimes to Montgomery Clift or James Dean, and they would say you're so pensive and you're so. It was just my internal side trying to come out, trying to let go of that thing, and I ended up playing a lot of those type of characters, and I was good at it because that's where I was. Um, Many times I will tell you that there I did a film and during the audition, they asked me to strip down to my underwear and to do the reading in my underwear because they needed to see my body. And I thought, okay, this is normal. I'll do this. Yeah, boom. Well, when the film came out, like DVDs and everything, the audition is right there at the end of the film. There I am in my nakedness, which I thought was only going to be between us, me, and the casting director. No. And then I know I had another experience where I was going in for oh my goodness, this film that I wanted so bad by Patricia Now Warren, the front runner. I don't know if you've read that book ever. It was way ahead of its time. And they tried to make it a film several times. I was brought in a couple of times. And I remember at one point they were doing the scene between me and the coach, the Harlan, and they were filming it, and all of a sudden it turned into this event, and this casting director had his way, and it's on film somewhere. And you sit there and you don't think about it at the time, and then you're walking away and you're like, what just happened? I found myself putting myself back into those situations where I was not in control, someone else was. And the casting couch was real. And I think one of the things that I got known as in Hollywood was the Ice Prince. That's what they called me because I got very, very closed off and you couldn't get near me. And if anyone ever came on to me, I was really like standoffish, and that hurt my career.
Yeah, that is again, I think we continue to see there's a certain amount of comfort in what you know and what is
Yeah,
familiar, and trying to knock your body out of that rhythm to be like, hey, there is a different realm of possibility that lies out there. I think, like you said, we do sometimes require someone else's help and assistance. I think none of us as people are islands. I think all of us men have this self-aggrandized image of like, I did it by myself. I am the only person who can do it. And the reality is like, none of us can do it on our own. And being able to
yeah.
accept that help and admit to that, I think is a really, really big part of that healing journey that we go through. Um, I want to kind of touch upon, you had mentioned this earlier. This is something that I personally really enjoy doing, but you had mentioned journaling as a method of healing, which I think is just a great mode for a lot of men and just anybody in general to heal. Could you touch a little bit about what you journal about, how you journal? I think there tends to be a lot of questions around, well, what do I write about or how do I start this? And I think just being able to hear from someone who is on that journey, I think would be very, very helpful for everyone.
Yes, definitely. I want to say one thing real quick before I tell you that what you all are doing here is so healing by bringing up voices and talking and talking between each other and realizing that it's okay to share what we're talking about. And that is so healing. So that's really, really important.
Thank
And the
you.
work that you all are doing is incredible. I've watched so many of these and I walk away thinking, thank God, because I feel so much better, even though I'm devastated by what happened to certain people and what they went through. I don't feel so alone anymore. And that's so thank you for that. Um, with the situation with journaling, I always journaled. I remember journaling as a kid, writing all the time. And it wasn't until I did go to one therapist who was also a life coach, and she really pushed the writing, the journaling. And this was before I wrote the two books. And so the journals became what I was experiencing, writing anything down. It didn't matter. She also handed me a book called The Artist Way. And that was, and they have morning pages where you write 3 pages every morning about anything. You just start writing, you don't stop, you don't care grammar, nothing. It doesn't matter what it is. You just, whatever on your head, you just write it down on the paper. And the goal is to get 3 pages. That's all you had to do. And sometimes it's gibberish. Sometimes all of a sudden something will come through. And it's just a matter of getting that writing on the paper. And that really started to free things up for me. And that started to help me to understand things. Today, as I journal every morning, I'll be reading a certain book. I went through this whole phase of reading everything I can get my hands on with Lewis Howes. And everything would be like he would hit something, and I would like, oh, that would open something up. I'm right now reading Brene Brown's book called The Braving the Wilderness. And there's little things that she talks about, and all of a sudden it is opening up new things that I have not talked about or I hidden. I would just write it down. It doesn't have to be in detail, just a thought down. And then I could go back if I want and add to it. And it's really interesting how this journey starts coming and starts, it's like a puzzle, a jigsaw puzzle that are piecing things together. And in my journey of healing and going through this, and even with my talks, there are new things that come out every time I talk with people. Anytime I present, a new thought has come up. And that's exciting because that gets me closer to who I truly am. And journaling is my secret safe place that I could put these secrets in and not worry about anyone ever finding them. And if they do, probably am no longer here. And that's fine because, it's all truth. It's my truth. And it builds in my confidence of trusting myself. And I think that's the biggest thing that journaling does for me, is to trust me. Because I still struggle with my story because I keep thinking this really never happened, because that's that whole imposter syndrome that comes in. And but I also have too many journals that say this is real, this is true, and evidence that prove it, letters, the contract with the lawyer, I have a copy. Why would this happen? You know, so it's my truth base.
So I think it's interesting, John Michael, we talked about this, that you and I and Lorward each have about 2 decades between each of us in when our abuse happened. And that's quite amazing because not only do we all share a lot of the same effects that it had, and we share a lot of the healing and the doubts and the guilt and the shame and all of that, it's still there. But what has changed is the ability for men to come forward. I mean, when I was abused, there was no way it was ever going to happen. When you were abused, still wasn't going to happen. It was a little, hopefully, easier for Lorward. I'm not going to speak for him, but it is getting a little better. Men's voices are starting to be heard. I think probably in the last 3, 4, 5 years, we've seen an incredible change. Why is that, and how do we keep that happening, and how do we move this forward so it's just was it Me Too? I think that helped, actually, the women's Me Too. But what are your opinions on how we keep that moving forward and get that to be just so that people are very free to talk about it, especially men?
Right. And again, I don't want to speak for Laurel because I think he has his own voice and it's incredible. But I do think that this new generation that's coming up are finally saying no more. And they're finally saying this is enough, and they're the ones that are, yeah, I think the older guys have started to break the ground to get that ability to voice things out. And I think what we have done, Craig, is that we have broken ground on that and allowing them to have that safe space. But they have also evolved in a way that we weren't, and the social media and all this technology is forcing them into another new realm. And I think they're dealing with struggles that we never experienced. The online grooming is just as effective as in-person grooming. And I think what's happening is that there are more men starting to stand up and more younger men. Perry Powers is another one who has stood up and said, this is happening, people, listen. And I think the bravery of this is allowing us to hear more. And I do think that we have to be thankful for the Me Too movement and the U.S. gymnastics females and all these people stepping up and saying things, because as men, we're starting to hear that and we recognize similarities. And I think we're slowly starting to be able to voice ourselves, but we're still stuck in this whole patriarchal society that the men in power do not want to hear this. And I don't know if it's because they have some secret background. Maybe they were abused, or maybe they were a part of the abuse or whatever, but they don't want that light to be shined. And so they're still struggling to keep it quiet, especially in sports. And they just are not willing to budge. And I think the more NFL players that come forward, like Dwight Hicks and all these people they're stepping forward and say, this happened to me too. And I think that's slowly starting to get the ground to open up. But I think people are scared. So what does this mean? If men are being abused, then what is that saying about our whole society? And I think that keeps people afraid to talk. And I think the younger generations are a little braver in a way and said, I don't care what you think of me. This is what I'm going to say, and this is what's happening. And again, I don't want to put words in Laurel's mouth, but I think that's what's happening. I think they're starting to say, we got to stop this.
Yeah. You took the words out of my mouth, so thank you. I can definitely speak just very briefly on my own personal convictions. I was very scared, trying to share my story, and I was very concerned. And I thought, well, what if no one cares what I have to say? What if it doesn't matter? And I was, to myself, the thing that I thought of was the alternative to me not saying anything is much, much more scary than the alternative of me speaking up and telling the truth. And that scares me. And so that was a big catalyst for me. And also the recognition that, hey, people before me have busted down walls that I don't have to break. And I can be grateful for that. And I can try to pass that along. And that was something that I thought about a lot when I was sharing my story, where I said, I want to be able to say with good faith and confidence that I did my best to lay the groundwork for the next generation behind me to be able to speak their story and to admit to themselves, hey, predecessors before us have done the work for us so that we wouldn't have to. Because this, just telling your story and admitting to yourself this thing happened, is so unbelievably difficult. And the more that we as a community can come together, bind together and say, your story is my story, and we'll all work for each other, I think just makes the world a little bit more beautiful in that way. And even if it's in a small way, I think speaking our truth does make a big, big difference. Sorry, that was all a little bit of a tangent.
Well, I mean, you're such an inspiration, and both of you are to me, because I mean, one of the biggest things that when I came forward and broke my silence, it took me way more than 25 years, I'll tell you that. And it was feeling so alone for so long, and you guys, when I learned that people are willing to come forward and talk about it, it's just so incredibly helpful. When I watched Leaving Neverland the first time and saw these guys come forward and against an icon, and incredible things that they had to endure based on that, it was so helpful and so powerful. And that's why we do this, right? That's why we have this program. That's why we're doing this. And I just can't thank you guys enough, because I don't want people to have to wait 25 years to deal with what happened to them. It takes, a long time to recover, as you said, a whole lifetime of recovery, but your life is better once you break that silence. Once you start healing and you start that road to recover, your life does get better, and you do start to heal. And you may not be completely healed ever, but you are at least further along than if you never told anybody before at all.
Perfectly said.
Yeah.
And I think the younger generation who are coming forward and speaking are such an inspiration for the older generation to be able to come up forward as well, because we're watching these young, brave men coming up and saying these stories, and we're like, oh my God, that was my story when I was that age. And it allows us to support them, because once someone steps forward and you can identify and connect with them, you're willing to step forward and link arms. So I think that's what we're starting to see. I think we're starting to see these things happen. There's still so many things going on in our nation that we watch, the Kevin Spacey's situation and that how that all played out just seems so unreal to me because, the kid couldn't remember all the details. And so they're going to, and yet Spacey couldn't remember all the details, but he's okay. We're going to acquit him.
You said
But
you
it
couldn't
doesn't
remember.
erase what happened.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that we're starting to understand. I think, we carry this with us, stamped on our souls for the rest of our lives, and it affects everything in how we, you know, um, act in society and how we do what we do. And I think we're starting to realize that this is a problem. It's just not a one-time deal and it's over with and everybody's forgiven. It's also the whole thing, like, everybody was shocked with Nasser going to prison. And then they expected that all these girls had their revenge and that they should be okay. But what they failed to realize that these young women are now just beginning their healing journey. And they're just starting to understand the implications of that they have gone through, and all the challenges that are still waiting for them ahead in their life. Because each part of their life is going to be affected by that moment that this man took to take care of his desire.
And I think that's the commonality between men and women survivors is we all have these things like, I was running from place to place and running from job to job based on feeling unsafe or threatened, and I didn't realize what was going on until you actually start to accept what happened to you and start to heal. And it also has a terrible effect, not just on what you're doing publicly, but what you're doing internally, your relationships and your view on sexuality. And it's just, you are marred from having a quote normal relationships in a lot of ways, especially before you start the healing process. How did you see that as well?
Oh, definitely. I see it affecting everything in my life where I have to make a decision. I mean, even just going to vote, there's moments that I'm like, oh my God, this is affecting the way I look at things. This is the way I interpret things based on what happened. In my situation, it all was, at that time when I never got to experience going out on a date with someone my age. Because I started diving at 12 and was by 14, I was going to the Junior Olympics. So that was unnormal, and it put me in a different bracket or whatever you want to say, a group of people. And so everything became about the sport. And so dating was out picture. There was no time because I was practicing in the morning and at night and going to school and then all this stuff. And then when the abuse started happening, besides going to school and practice, I was going on these events, I call them, with older people. And I never got that chance to experiment. What would it be like to be with someone my age? What would it be like to, hold her hand walking down the hallway? Um, and it just was, it's something I feel like I've missed. And that has really spilled over into everything I do, jobs. Like you said, there were moments I would go from job to job to job to job. And one of the things acting was so good was that the job would end. It would only go so far. And then, you have closing night. Oh, thank God nobody got to know anything about me really. So then I could go to the next job and be everything everybody wanted me to be and never find out who I truly was. And I think that's extremely exhausting. And I found that even when I was doing like corporate business, I would only go to a certain point and then I had to find another job because I didn't know if they were going to find out about me. And it was like I was always running, like you were saying, and it's just affects everything. I mean, sometimes going to the grocery store, do I buy almond milk or do I buy, and I know that sounds stupid, but it really plays effect on what decisions I make.
Absolutely. I think just trying to run through that process of how do I be a person again? How do I find myself in this healing is such a journey.
and who am I? And
Yeah.
what do I like?
Yeah.
Because for so long you were living someone else's life. You were
Yeah.
doing what you thought everybody else wanted you to do.
Mhm. You're so hyper
Who-
attuned to your environment that you forget to neglect your personal environment.
Perfectly said. Yes.
Yeah. And I think that's such a true struggle where you finally sit alone with yourself and you're like, I don't even know what I would do if I had 2 hours to myself.
Exactly. Exactly. And then you run. And you're trying to find that place that feels comfortable, and yet you know that the old comfort is no longer good. I think you instinctually know that
Mhm.
that's not where you want to go, and it's impeding everything that you want. But the new area is so different, and there's no certainty there, and it's scary, and it's frightening, and you don't know what to do. And sometimes I think I revert back to where I know where I feel comfortable, and I think I know what I'm doing, and I really don't. It's a facade. It's an illusion.
None of us know what we're doing. We're all just trying to figure it
But
out.
we're figuring it out.
We're all just trying to help our inner child figure things out in the world. Um, I think you touched on something that I've felt many a time in my life where you're doing something, you think you know what you're doing, and then you start to get scared and you start to doubt
Mhm.
yourself and you think to yourself, am I even on the right path? Am I doing the right thing? And when you start to waver in those convictions, what would you tell survivors who are trying to heal in that process? And like, how do you even cope with that feeling of, I just don't know what I'm doing right now?
I feel like I do that every day, actually. It's one of those things I feel every morning. Sometimes I'll do something and I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing? I think it's really one of those things. And if I was coaching someone else, I would say, okay, you had that feeling of going forward, or you had the choice. It becomes down to a choice. I want to give the power back to you it is a choice. So I choose to stay where I feel comfortable. It's not the best place for me, but I know what to expect and I know how to play the game. Or do I go over here where everything is new and different? It could help me. It can move me forward. It could be a very positive thing, but it's scary because I don't know how to play the game. And I think you have to have the choice or the power to make the choice. And as soon as you start realizing that you do have that choice, then it becomes a different animal in a way. Then you start realizing, oh, if I stay here, this is what I'm going to expect. But that could be something totally different and could help me and heal me. And then you make that choice. I don't think you can be told what to do. I think people, when they're told, especially survivors, really press the brakes. And I've seen this a lot with faith-based organizations who have wanted to help women who are trafficked. They bring them in and then start telling them what they need to do and how to do it. And my question to them is, these people have been programmed and groomed to be trafficked. You're taking them in and you're reprogramming them to be what you think that they need to be. Of course, they're going to do everything that you tell them because they've already been brainwashed in a way. You're doing the same thing to them. And then there's been a lot of allegations where these faith-based groups are also preparing to put them back out into a trafficking situation. And so that's where we have to find our own truth and we have to find our own power of knowing that it's okay and brave to stand alone. And we may feel like we are alone, but if that's my truth, it's like that Maya Angelou's statement about the tree growing along the river is to stand still and not go in the flow with the river. And it's just this whole strong image about being able to be who you are and be truthful to yourself is going to get you further than going with the flow.
Um, John Michael, one of our viewers here today is wondering about your case with Ohio State, and they were abused in another school. How do you go about, and the school knew and didn't take action? How does this person go about getting that case? Getting some kind of awareness and you know restitution or something.
Are they interested in moving forward with the case and putting an
I think so.
allegation
Yeah,
against
I
this guy?
think I'm guessing that from what I
I
read.
reach out to a lawyer. I think that would be the first step, and that's basically what I did. I went through several lawyers first before I ended up with the one that I had, because they were doing a group of athletes from Ohio State, and they were able to put me in with that. And that one, it made it a little simpler and easier because it was a group of us. But it's also very difficult because every time my case was denied, it would get picked up again. I would have to go back in and go through the whole question and answers completely all over from the beginning, even though that these lawyers knew my story. It was like almost as if they were preparing my answers to what I said first. Did I cross the T? Did I dot the I the same way? Did I present it and sound the same way as I did before? Because then it could also be changed, and the story could be turned around, and it's frustrating. So I would say that I would also try to find someone on campus who there's usually a group that will listen to you, and they will take your statement, and they will also help guide you into the right way, because each school has its unique way about doing it with Title IX and all this stuff now that's changing. But don't give up. And I would also, whatever school it is, if you want to contact me, I'm happy to help you and get you some direction. But it's each school is different. Although they're supposed to be under the same umbrella, they all have their own way of handling things.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, though, usually when somebody comes forward with something, they're not the only ones. They're not the only
Correct.
ones. So that would there is power in numbers for sure, but you usually don't get those numbers until the first person is brave enough to come forward.
And sometimes, and this could be a drastic thing, is to reach out to the press, the media, to get your story out there. And that sometimes can also validate that your story is now out in the media, and that can cause a movement forward.
Um, no, Michael, I think that is just a great piece of advice. I think what you said is usually when you come forward, you're not the only one, and there are a lot of other people. Um, I want to kind of ask you perhaps maybe a little bit of a thought here. Like, what message would you like to leave survivors who are here and and just out there in general? Just give us like a quick little 3-minute monologue.
Okay, I'll try to do that. Yeah. First of all, I just want to share that, we've all gone through some type of trauma as we were growing up and as we go through our lives. That's human. Depending on that trauma, it's how we put the meaning to it, which causes us to create the self-talk that we have within ourselves. I also believe that every survivor can heal and can find their own voice again and get back to the life that they wanted, and to their true life. And it just takes work. The first thing you have to do is to admit that it happened. You have to be real with yourself, and you have to acknowledge it, and you have to say, this is what happened. And then that's where the journaling can come in and help you out, because that is where you can put your thoughts. And if you go back and you look at the journals, you'll start seeing a theme. You'll start seeing things start to piece together, and you start seeing that the story will come out. And that's because you're writing subconsciously and you're just getting it out, and it's not important. And that's where it starts flowing through. Also say get professional help, whichever is best for you. Different methods for different people. We're all unique. We're all not a cookie cutter. What works for one person is not going to work for another. So you have to find that for yourself. That also shows that you are taking decision and you're creating your own decisions, which is the power that you're giving back to yourself. So everything is going to come back to you finding your power and your voice and your healing. And the only way to do that is that you started and you find the way to do it for yourself. But do not neglect getting the professional help, because if you don't get the professional help like I did, you're going to repeat, and you're going to find yourself back in a situation which could be worse than the situation you were in first, because that's what you know, and that's what your subconscious is bringing back to you, is saying, this is safe over here. And what we need to do is break that cycle and realize that that is not the truth. The truth is over here.
So what's next for you, John Michael? You're running as fast as you can to help everybody. What's on your agenda?
there's some things that I'm really excited about doing. I'm really reaching out to a lot of people about the predatory internet grooming to get that voice out there. And I'm working with some people on the dark web. And, I've reached out to the FBI and that stuff and trying to get that working out and get that program to parents so that parents and children can really understand the issues, because it's like 90% of people don't even understand all the issues that this entails, because the verbiage that people are using on the internet doesn't make sense, because one says this and another says this. So we're trying to combine everything and put it together so there is a common language, so parents and children can understand the importance of this issue. I'm also working with the New Jersey Coalition to End Human Trafficking. We're doing a whole educational program called the Human Trafficking One-on-One, where we're taking it out into schools, middle school and high schools, to help teachers understand and what to look for. And so that they can be that person that if a child is given an indicator, will ask, and to help children see that there is hope and that they're being heard and believed. And I believe that's one of the things that I think we need to take away, is that children want to be heard and they want to be believed. This with us, stamped on our souls for the rest of our lives, and it affects everything and how we act in society and how we do what we do. And I think we're starting to realize that this is a problem. It's just not a one-time deal and it's over with and everybody's forgiven. It's also the whole thing, like, everybody was shocked with Nasser going to prison, and then they expected that all these girls had their revenge and that they should be okay. But what they failed to realize, that these young women are now just beginning their healing journey. And they're just starting to understand the implications of what that they have gone through, and all the challenges that are still waiting for them ahead in their life. Because each part of their life is going to be affected by that moment that this man took to take care of his desire.
And I think that's the commonality between men and women. Survivors, is we all have these things, like, I was running from place to place and running from job to job based on feeling unsafe or threatened, and I didn't realize what was going on until you actually start to accept what happened to you and start to heal. And it also has a terrible effect, not just on what you're doing publicly, but what you're doing internally, your relationships and your view on sexuality. And it's just, you are marred from having a quote normal relationships in a lot of ways, especially before you start the healing process. How did you see that as well?
Oh, definitely. I see it affecting everything in my life where I have to make a decision. I mean, even just going to vote, there's moments that I'm like, oh my God, this is affecting the way I look at things. This is the way I interpret things based on what happened. In my situation, it all was, at that time when I never got to experience going out on a date with someone my age. Because I started diving at 12, and I, was by 14, I was going to the Junior Olympics. So that was unnormal, and it put me in a different bracket, or whatever you want to say, a group of people. And so everything became about the sport. And so dating was out of the picture. There was no time, because I was practicing in the morning and at night and going to school and then all this stuff. And then when the abuse started happening, besides going to school and practice, I was going on these events, I call them, with older people. And I never got that chance to experiment. What would it be like to be with someone my age? What would it be like to, hold her hand walking down the hallway? And it just was, it's something I feel like I've missed. And that has really spilled over into everything I do. Jobs. Like you said, there were moments I would go from job to job to job to job. And one of the things acting was so good was that the job would end. It would only go so far. And then, you have closing night. Oh, thank God, nobody got to know anything about me, really. So then I could go to the next job and be everything everybody wanted me to be, and never find out who I truly was. And I think that's extremely exhausting. And I found that even when I was doing like corporate business, I would only go to a certain point, and then I had to find another job because I didn't know if they were going to find out about me. And it was like I was always running, like you were saying, it's just affects everything. I mean, sometimes going to the grocery store, do I do I buy almond milk or do I buy, and I know that sounds stupid, but it really plays effect on what decisions I make.
Absolutely. I think just trying to run through that process of how do I be a person again? How do I find myself in this healing is such a journey.
And who am I? And
Yeah.
what do I like?
Yeah.
Because for so long you were living someone else's life. You were
Yeah.
doing what you thought everybody else wanted you to do.
Mhm. You're so hyper
You
attuned to your environment that you forget to neglect your personal environment.
Perfectly said. Yes.
Yeah. And I think that's such a true struggle where you finally sit alone with yourself and you're like, I don't even know what I would do if I had 2 hours to myself.
Exactly. Exactly. And then you run. And you're trying to find that place that feels comfortable, and yet you know that the old comfort is no longer good. I think you instinctually know that
Mhm.
that's not where you want to go, and it's impeding everything that you want. But the new area is so different, and there's no certainty there, and it's scary, and it's frightening, and you don't know what to do. And sometimes I think I revert back to where I know where I feel comfortable, and I think I know what I'm doing, and I really don't. It's a facade. It's an illusion.
None of us know what we're doing. We're all just trying to figure it
But
out.
we're figuring it out.
We're all just trying to help our inner child figure things out in the world. Um, I think you touched on something that I've felt many a time in my life where you're doing something, you think you know what you're doing, and then you start to get scared and you start to doubt
Mhm.
yourself and you think to yourself, am I even on the right path? Am I doing the right thing? And when you start to waver in those convictions, what would you tell survivors who are trying to heal in that process? And like, how do you even cope with that feeling of, I just don't know what I'm doing right now?
I feel like I do that every day, actually. It's one of those things I feel every morning. Sometimes I'll do something and I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing? I think it's really one of those things. And if I was coaching someone else, I would say, okay, you had that feeling of going forward, or you had the choice. It becomes down to a choice. I want to give the power back to you it is a choice. So I choose to stay where I feel comfortable. It's not the best place for me, but I know what to expect and I know how to play the game. Or do I go over here where everything is new and different? It could help me. It can move me forward. It could be a very positive thing, but it's scary because I don't know how to play the game. And I think you have to have the choice or the power to make the choice. And as soon as you start realizing that you do have that choice, then it becomes a different animal in a way. Then you start realizing, oh, if I stay here, this is what I'm going to expect. But that could be something totally different and could help me and heal me. And then you make that choice. I don't think you can be told what to do. I think people, when they're told, especially survivors, really press the brakes. And I've seen this a lot with faith-based organizations who have wanted to help women who are trafficked. They bring them in and then start telling them what they need to do and how to do it. And my question to them is, these people have been programmed and groomed to be trafficked. You're taking them in and you're reprogramming them to be what you think that they need to be. Of course, they're going to do everything that you tell them because they've already been brainwashed in a way. You're doing the same thing to them. And then there's been a lot of allegations where these faith-based groups are also preparing to put them back out into a trafficking situation. And so that's where we have to find our own truth and we have to find our own power of knowing that it's okay and brave to stand alone. And we may feel like we are alone, but if that's my truth, it's like that Maya Angelou's statement about the tree growing along the river is to stand still and not go in the flow with the river. And it's just this whole strong image about being able to be who you are and be truthful to yourself is going to get you further than going with the flow.
Um, John Michael, one of our viewers here today is wondering about your case with Ohio State, and they were abused in another school. How do you go about, and the school knew and didn't take action? How does this person go about getting that case, getting some kind of awareness and restitution
I,
or something?
are they interested in moving forward with the case and putting an
I think so.
allegation
Yeah,
against
I
this guy?
think I'm guessing that from what I
I
read.
reach out to a lawyer. I think that would be the first step, and that's basically what I did. I went through several lawyers first before I ended up with the one that I had because they were doing a group of athletes from Ohio State, and they were able to put me in with that. And that one, it made it a little simpler and easier because it was a group of us. But it's also very difficult because every time my case was denied, it would get picked up again. I would have to go back in and go through the whole question and answers completely all over from the beginning, even though that these lawyers knew my story. It was like almost as if they were um, preparing my answers to what I said first. Did I cross the T? Did I dot the I the same way? Did I present it and sound the same way as I did before? Because then it could also be changed and the story could be turned around and it's frustrating. So I would say that I would also try to find someone on campus who there's usually a group that will listen to you and they will take your statement and they will also help guide you into the right way because each school has its unique way about doing it with Title IX and all this stuff now that's changing. But don't give up. And I would also, whatever school it is, if you want to contact me, I'm happy to help you and get you some direction. But it's each school is different. Although they're supposed to be under the same umbrella, they all have their own way of handling things.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, though, usually when somebody comes forward with something, they're not the only ones. They're not the only
Correct.
ones. So that would there is power in numbers for sure, but you usually don't get those numbers until the first person is brave enough to come forward.
And sometimes, and this could be a drastic thing, is to reach out to the press, the media, to get your story out there. And that sometimes can also validate that your story is now out in the media, and that can cause a movement forward.
Um, no, Michael, I think that is just a great piece of advice. I think what you said is usually when you come forward, you're not the only one, and there are a lot of other people. Um, I want to kind of ask you perhaps maybe a little bit of a thought here. Like, what message would you like to leave survivors who are here and and just out there in general? Just give us like a quick little 3-minute monologue.
Okay, I'll try to do that. Yeah. First of all, I just want to share that, we've all gone through some type of trauma as we were growing up and as we go through our lives. That's human. Depending on that trauma, it's how we put the meaning to it, which causes us to create the self-talk that we have within ourselves. I also believe that every survivor can heal and can find their own voice again and get back to the life that they wanted and to their true life. And it just takes work. The first thing you have to do is to admit that it happened. You have to be real with yourself and you have to acknowledge it and you have to say, this is what happened. And then that's where the journaling can come in and help you out because that is where you can put your thoughts. And if you go back and you look at the journals, you'll start seeing a theme. You'll start seeing things start to piece together and you start seeing that the story will come out. And that's because you're writing subconsciously and you're just getting it out and it's not important. And that's where it starts flowing through. Also say get professional help, whichever is best for you. Different methods for different people. We're all unique. We're all not a cookie cutter. What works for one person is not going to work for another. So you have to find that for yourself. That also shows that you are taking decision and you're creating your own decisions, which is the power that you're giving back to yourself. So everything is going to come back to you finding your power and your voice and your healing. And the only way to do that is that you started and you find the way to do it for yourself. But do not neglect getting the professional help because if you don't get the professional help like I did, you're going to repeat, and you're going to find yourself back in a situation which could be worse than the situation you were in first, because that's what you know, and that's what your subconscious is bringing back to you, is saying, this is safe over here. And what we need to do is break that cycle and realize that that is not the truth. The truth is over here.
So what's next for you, John Michael? You're running as fast as you can to help everybody. What's on your agenda?
There's some things that I'm really excited about doing. I'm really reaching out to a lot of people about the predatory internet grooming to get that voice out there. And I'm working with some people on the dark web, and I've reached out to the FBI and that stuff, and trying to get that working out and get that program to parents, so that parents and children can really understand the issues, because it's like 90% of people don't even understand all the issues that this entails, because the verbiage that people are using on the internet doesn't make sense, because one says this and another says this. So we're trying to combine everything and put it together so there is a common language, so parents and children can understand the importance of this issue. I'm also working with the New Jersey Coalition to End Human Trafficking. We're doing a whole educational program called the Human Trafficking 101, where we're taking it out into schools, middle school and high schools, to help teachers understand and what to look for. And so that they can be that person that if a child is given an indicator, will ask, and to help children see that there is hope and that they're being heard and believed. And I believe that's one of the things that I think we need to take away, is that children want to be heard and they want to be believed. What is it? Only like 5% ever make up a story about sexual abuse. And that's even kind of high from what I understand. So I think the more that we're able to hear and listen and give support by believing them, it's such a healing step forward.
Yeah, I think you hit it right there. The more tools we can equip, it just gives them that healing step forward. And so, John Michael, thank you so much for joining our program today. It has honestly been such a pleasure, for sharing your story of triumph, for all your advice, for all your emotions, and just rawness of expressing, this is how I felt about everything that has gone on. And I think a lot of us, I know for me, multiple times I was like, I felt the exact same way, and I know that feeling so well, and it's so refreshing to hear it coming out from someone else. And I know your story has truly been an inspiration to all of us who have attended this program today.
Yeah, and John Michael, I hope that you'll join us again. I do think that we just touched the surface, and when we just started having a discussion, it was great. I think maybe we have a program where we just open up to a lot of men and just talk to each other, and maybe it's recorded, maybe it's not, but I think it would do a lot of good. Thanks to all of you who joined us today. We hope you found this discussion as enlightening, comforting, and helpful with your healing process, as Lorward and I did.
Absolutely. And we just want to thank you once again for your support, for attending these programs, for being in support of organizations like Voices Beyond Assault. And I hope that you all will go out and check out John Michael's work and his body of books, programs, and different programs that he's part of. And it's your courage that gives us all the strength. Thank you so much, everyone.
Hands on my chin, I was lost and looking in the glass of time. Was it just the wine made me cry? I hope I'm satisfied. I saw myself, an older man, folding up his paper plans and hiding it in his hands. Made me say, am I okay? Don't say too late tomorrow, too late tomorrow.